Mother-in-law called CPS on me because I refused to let her babysit. She said, "I'll prove you're a bad mom." I filed a restraining order. Now she's banned from seeing her grandkids. My name is Maribel, and I live in Caldwell, Idaho. It's a small, quiet town, the kind of place where nothing really exciting happens. People wave at each other on the street, neighbors bring casseroles when someone's sick, and the most dramatic thing to happen in years was when the post office got shut down for a month. But apparently, drama doesn't care where you live. It'll find you no matter where you are. This whole mess started with my mother-in-law, Selma. She's Ivan's mom, my husband, and she has always been, a lot. I don't know how else to put it. When I first met her, she seemed nice enough. She had this big, over-the-top personality, the kind that fills a room. She called everyone sweetheart or darlin' in this syrupy southern accent, even though she's never lived anywhere south of Montana. At first, I thought she was charming in her own way. I thought her loud opinions and constant need to be the center of attention were just quirks. I was wrong. When Ivan and I got serious, Selma's quirks started to feel less charming, more like red flags. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about everything, my cooking, the way I dressed, even the way I laughed. "Oh, Maribel," she'd say, "you're such a sweet girl, but don't you think you'd look better in something more fitted?" Or, "That laugh of yours, honey, it's so loud. Bless your heart, you just don't have a shy bone in your body, do you?" Ivan always brushed it off. "That's just Mom," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." And, like an idiot, I believed him. I let it slide because I loved him, and I wanted to keep the peace. But things really started going downhill after Ivan and I got married. Selma's need to insert herself into our lives went into overdrive. She'd show up at our house unannounced, let herself in with the spare key we gave her, just in case, and start reorganizing my kitchen cabinets like she lived there. She had opinions about everything, how we decorated, how we spent our money, even what kind of car we drove. Ivan kept telling me to ignore her, but it was exhausting. It felt like she didn't respect me or our boundaries at all. But the real nightmare started after we had Elias. Elias is our son. He's 2 now, but back when all this started, he was just a newborn. I was a first-time mom, and I'll be honest, I was overwhelmed. I wanted to do everything perfectly, even though I knew that wasn't possible. Selma, of course, saw this as her opportunity to swoop in and take over. She became obsessed with Elias. She bought him clothes, toys, diapers, stuff we didn't even ask for. At first, I thought it was sweet, but then she started overstepping. She'd show up at our house almost every day, demanding to hold Elias, feed him, and put him to bed. She acted like she was his third parent, and when I tried to set boundaries, she ignored them completely. One time, when Elias was about 2 months old, Selma came over while I was breastfeeding. I was sitting on the couch, trying to get Elias to latch, when she barged in without knocking. She didn't even blink when she saw me sitting there with my shirt half off. "Oh, Maribel," she said, "you're still doing that? No wonder he's so fussy. Formula would be so much easier for both of you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I calmly told her that I was committed to breastfeeding and asked if she could give us some privacy. She rolled her eyes and said, "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you wear yourself out." That was Selma in a nutshell. Always pushing, always criticizing, always acting like she knew better. It was bad enough when she was just giving unsolicited advice, but things got worse when she started demanding to babysit. When Elias was about 3 months old, Selma started dropping hints about how I needed a break. "You're looking run down, Maribel," she'd say. "Why don't you let me take Elias for the weekend? You can have some time to yourself." I told her no. Not because I didn't trust her, okay, maybe I didn't completely trust her, but mostly because I wasn't ready to leave Elias with anyone yet. I was a new mom, and I wanted to be with my baby. That's normal, right? Apparently, Selma didn't think so. When I refused, she got defensive. "Oh, so you don't think I'm capable," she said, crossing her arms like a teenager throwing a tantrum. "I raised Ivan, didn't I? He turned out just fine." "It's not about that, Selma," I said. "I'm just not ready to leave him yet." "Well, that's ridiculous," she snapped. "You're being selfish, Maribel. Grandparents have rights, you know." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next few weeks, Selma kept pushing. Every time she came over, she'd bring it up again. "You're going to burn yourself out," she'd say. "You need to let someone help you." When I kept saying no, she started making comments about how I was too controlling. "You're smothering him," she said one day. "That's not healthy, Maribel." At first, I tried to brush it off, but it was hard. I was sleep-deprived, hormonal, and already doubting myself as a new mom. Her comments started getting under my skin. Ivan, of course, didn't see the problem. "She just wants to help," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But I knew better. Selma wasn't just trying to help, she was trying to take over. And when she realized I wasn't going to give in, she decided to escalate things in the most insane way possible. Selma didn't like hearing no, and she wasn't going to let it go. A few days after our last argument, she showed up at our house again, unannounced as always. This time, she had a smug look on her face, like she was up to something. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel my stomach twist. "Hi, Selma," I said, opening the door halfway. I was holding Elias in one arm, rocking him gently because he'd just fallen asleep. "Now's not a great time. Can you come back later?" "Oh, don't be silly, Maribel," she said, pushing past me into the house like I hadn't even spoken. She glanced at Elias and gave him a wide, exaggerated grin. "There's my precious baby boy. Grandma's here." "Selma, I just got him to sleep," I said through gritted teeth. "Please don't wake him." She ignored me completely. She sat down on the couch, crossed her legs, and started talking about how she'd been doing some research. "Did you know that parents today are too overprotective?" she said, flipping her hair like she was on a talk show. "It's a real problem. Kids need independence. They need to learn how to handle being away from their mothers." I stared at her. "What are you getting at, Selma?" She gave me a pointed look. "I'm saying you need to loosen your grip, Maribel. You're going to ruin that boy if you don't." I didn't have the energy to argue with her. "I think it's time for you to go," I said firmly. She stood up, her face turning red with anger. "Fine," she snapped. "But don't come crying to me when you realize you can't handle it all on your own." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I let out a long breath, trying to calm myself down. I thought that was the end of it. I thought she'd finally drop it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a knock on the door that would change everything. When I opened it, there were 2 people standing on my porch, a woman in a blazer holding a clipboard and a man in a button-up shirt. They introduced themselves as Child Protective Services. "We received a report of neglect," the woman said, her tone flat but professional. "We need to ask you some questions about your home environment and your child's well-being." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Neglect?" I stammered. "There's been a mistake. I would never neglect my son." The woman gave me a tight smile. "We're just here to make sure everything's okay." They asked to come inside, and I didn't know what else to do but let them in. They looked around the house, inspected Elias's crib, asked me about his feeding schedule, and even checked the fridge to see if we had enough food. It was humiliating. I felt like a criminal in my own home. When they finally left, I was shaking. I called Ivan at work and told him what happened. He was furious at me. "You must have done something to set her off," he said. "Why would someone report you if there wasn't a reason?" "Someone?" I said, my voice rising. "You know exactly who did this, Ivan. Your mother. She's been threatening me for weeks." He didn't believe me. "You're being paranoid," he said. "Mom wouldn't do something like that." But I knew. I knew Selma was behind it. She'd been trying to prove I was an unfit mother, and now she was using CPS to scare me into letting her babysit. That was my breaking point. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The next day, I called a lawyer. I told him everything, how Selma had been harassing me, how she'd refused to respect our boundaries, and how I was sure she was the one who called CPS. He listened carefully and then told me we had options. First, I filed a restraining order against Selma. It wasn't easy, but I had text messages and voicemails from her that showed a clear pattern of harassment. I also told the lawyer about the CPS visit, and he said we could include that in the restraining order as further proof of her behavior. When Selma was served with the papers, she lost it. She called Ivan and screamed at him over the phone, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Ivan came home that night furious. "Why would you do this?" he demanded. "She's my mother, Maribel." "Exactly," I said. "She's your mother. She's not Elias's mother, and she needs to stay in her lane." He didn't like that answer, but I didn't care. I was done trying to keep the peace. I was done letting Selma walk all over me. The restraining order worked, for a while. Selma wasn't allowed to come near me or Elias, and she couldn't contact us directly. But she found ways to make her presence known. She started spreading rumors about me around town, telling anyone who would listen that I was an unfit mother who had stolen her grandchild. I didn't let it get to me. Instead, I focused on what mattered, protecting my son. I kept a record of everything, every rumor, every backhanded comment from mutual acquaintances, every time she tried to skirt around the restraining order. I knew she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. One day, Selma made her biggest mistake yet. She showed up at Elias's daycare, trying to pick him up. She told the staff she had permission, but thankfully, they knew better. They called me right away, and I called the police. That was the final nail in the coffin. With the restraining order already in place, Selma's attempt to take Elias from daycare was enough to escalate things legally. She was charged with violating the restraining order, and the court banned her from having any contact with Elias, ever. Ivan was devastated. He tried to convince me to let Selma back into our lives, but I refused. She called CPS on me, Ivan, I said. She tried to take our son from his daycare. She doesn't care about us, she just wants control. Eventually, Ivan saw the light. He apologized for not standing up for me sooner, and we started going to couples counseling to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy, but we made it through. As for Selma, she's out of our lives for good. She's banned from seeing Elias, and honestly, I've never felt more at peace. Sometimes, the only way to deal with toxic people is to cut them out completely. And that's exactly what I did. That's the story. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. My son is safe, my family is healing, and Selma, well, she got exactly what she deserved.